It's now time to catch up on what was a very busy week in Australian Parliament.
It certainly was.
With our Saturday Polly panel, we're joined now this morning by Labor MP Amanda Rishworth and Darren Chester, the Minister for Veterans Affairs. Thank you both of you for joining us this morning. Darren Chester, I might start with you there in Sale. You've had a very interesting week with your party, the Nationals, this week. It started off with the reshuffling, of course, after Bridget McKenzie quit the front bench. Then there was a challenge for Michael McCormack's leadership by Barnaby Joyce. There's also been revelations that there's this so-called rebel group within the Nationals willing to block the coalition's agenda. The failed leadership challenge, it certainly doesn't spell the end of the unrest in your party, does it?
Well, I had a feeling you might start with me, and it has been a bit of a frustrating week, I guess, from the outset. I mean, I was pretty disappointed to learn about plans to challenge Michael's leadership. Keep in mind, Michael McCormack was elected our leader 2 years ago, re-elected after the election, and now elected again this week. So he's been elected leader 3 times by the party in the last 2 years, which I suggest would indicate he has strong support in the room. But notwithstanding that, there are other people in the room who had ambitions for taking on the role, and I've got to say they were soundly defeated in the room. So I think we need to unite now behind Michael and just get on with the job of representing regional Australia. The people of regional Australia send us there to fight for them, not to fight amongst ourselves. And I'm very passionate about making sure we continue to represent regional Australians.
You know, Amanda, we're going to come to you in just a moment, but Darren, we want to stay with you just for a little bit longer and just talk about that leadership challenge here. Barnaby Joyce, who basically made that challenge, he's not on the front bench at all for the national parties. Is that a safe position? I mean, shouldn't he be in a position where Michael McCormack can keep an eye on him?
Well, people in Parliament all have some level of ambitions. I have enormous ambitions. My ambitions are for regional Australians, and my ambition I have is to see regional towns grow. I mean, we look at our cities like Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. They are congested and growing at ridiculous rates. We should take the pressure off the growth in those cities and grow regional Australia and put more infrastructure spending, more service delivery in our region. So ambition is nothing unusual in Parliament. My ambition is to grow my community, and when it comes to Barnaby's aspirations, well, there's no vacancy in that position right now. There's no vacancy at the leadership level.
But
Michael has won the leadership. He deserves to lead.
There certainly still does seem to be division within your party, some voices that are and have been very loud in your party. There still remains that division.
Well, as I understand the media coverage yesterday, was that some members indicated as backbenchers, which backbenchers always reserve their right to vote whatever way they like on different bits of policy. They've indicated that they reserve their right to cross the floor, but you've got to have some legislation you don't agree with to cross the floor in the first place. I mean, there's nothing before the House right now that they'd be looking to cross the floor on. We have got more support coming through for people who have been impacted by bushfires. We've got the Royal Commission into the bushfires. I surely don't think they're going to cross the floor on those types of things. So I'm not sure exactly what the coverage was about, but you know, our focus has to be on regional Australians who are experiencing the drought conditions, recovering from bushfires, now likely to have some flooding events in large parts of New South Wales and Queensland over the weekend. So our focus has to be on the people who send us there to Parliament to fight for them.
All right, Amanda, we want to bring you in, and we thank you so much for your patience as well. But let's talk about where Labor is going into this first week of Parliament as well. Last year ended with the Labor Party doing a lot of soul-searching, and they kind of pulled back a little bit here. That was towards the end of last year. But going forward, Anthony Albanese, the head of the party, has said that there is a policy, a climate policy, but it will be very different to the one that they brought to the election. Where does Labor stand in terms of the climate policies?
Well, look, obviously, we've got 2 big jobs this year as the Labor Party. One is holding the government to account, and this week in Parliament we've spent a significant amount of time exposing the sports scandal and calling for practical action when it comes to bushfire relief. But in addition to holding the government to account, we also will be outlining our vision for the country. And Anthony Albanese has already outlined a number of vision statements around the economy and making sure the economy works for ordinary Australians, but also actually talking about climate action being an opportunity for our country, an opportunity to in jobs, in R&D, whole range of things in terms of bringing down electricity prices. So we've announced our broad policies, our broad visions about where we want the country to go. And over this year, we will continue to develop our policies in terms of the detail. But that is not going to stop us from also holding the government to account. That's a big job because this government has no plan. It's obsessed about itself. And so we will be highlighting those issues as well as giving the government practical solutions that they could do right now, not wait for an election to implement.
But Amanda, is there unity in your party on climate policy? Labor MP Joel Fitzgibbon, who's the MP for the Hunter region, he's been very outspoken in supporting coal and the coal industry. How will Labor balance action on climate change and supporting the coal industry?
We need a national approach to climate change, which actually meets our Paris Agreement. At the moment, the government is nowhere near on track to actually meet its climate objectives that it signed up to in the Paris Accord. So Labor will be working towards actually taking action on climate change. There's only one party that's been serious about taking action on climate change, and that is the Labor Party. We need a national approach. We don't have that from the government. We have a government that is shirking its responsibilities, and the details of that we will move forward on as a party. But we are united. We don't have the climate deniers in our party like the Liberal Party have. We are over the debate of whether climate change is real or not, whether humans have an impact. Of course humans have an impact. That's what the science says.
But Amanda, my question was about how the coal industry fits into that plan.
Well, of course, we'll be working on a national plan, but in terms of coal exports still have a role to play in our economy. That doesn't stop you from having a national plan that actually will meet your Paris Agreement targets. So we will be working towards that, but we're committed to doing that. Unlike the government, who doesn't want to touch climate change, doesn't want to acknowledge it. Half of the party doesn't even acknowledge it exists. So that is a very, very bad starting point, whereas we want to have a proper conversation and we will have a policy going in election. This
is a question to both of you, and really I realise it's a very broad question. And Darren, perhaps you could start with your answer. My question really is Australia being let down by the internal conflicts within the Liberal Party, within the National Party? And Amanda, I want to get to you as well. The fact that Labor has really sort of swiveled away from their own plans from last year's elections and now have come up with some sort of soft plan for climate change, but nothing really concrete. Darren, if I could start with you, is Australia being let down by their political leaders?
Well, I don't think so. I think we do, on occasions, let the Australian people down when we fight amongst ourselves. Now, Labor and Liberals have experienced it in recent times, sadly, and this week was the National Party's turn, and I think we do let them down on those occasions. But more broadly, there is a lot of consensus in the federal parliament on a range of political issues and legislative issues, and bills often pass with support of both sides of the House. I think a lot of people go to the parliament with the absolutely best intentions to try and make a difference in their communities. And in terms of the broader climate debate we're having right now, we've got to try and achieve our international targets, be good international citizens, reduce our emissions in accordance with those international agreements, but not mug the economy in the process. So we've got to have jobs in our traditional industries, in the mining sector, in the timber industry, in my case here in Gippsland. Make sure we've got those jobs in traditional industries that are sustainable and long-term jobs, but at the same time make our contribution to reducing emissions and the practical initiatives like hazard reduction burning and clearing around towns to make them safer when bushfires eventuate. So there's a lot of work for governments to do, and we need to keep working constructively to achieve it.
Amanda, you know, it does seem, and you've just spent the last 3 minutes or so attacking the government. Do you think that just seems to be a culture of Australian politics, this whole very divisive bipartisan politics and bipartisan conflict? Is that taking away from real leadership in Australia?
Well, look, I think when it comes to politics, it is a contest of ideas. You don't get elected to Parliament not believing in something and not wanting to make a difference. In saying that, I think there is times when we can be constructive, and I think of a number of times where political parties have got together and actually come up with a compromise. And we were close to that on climate change, both under Labor and under the coalition. But unfortunately, there were a number of people that decided to hold the then Turnbull government to ransom. So it is a challenge. It is always a challenge, but I think if you don't have strong views and strong beliefs about why you got into politics, then you're not really going to put your hand up. And of course, that does lead to a partisan debate. But we can always do better at working together on things, and there's many examples where politicians do. But in things that you hold very dearly, and when you don't see the government taking the action you'd like, you're going to be critical, and that is the job of a Member of Parliament and an opposition.
Amanda Rishworth, Darren Chester, we really appreciate you joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.